everyone. Welcome to CSRA's community of practice for this month. We're very excited. We have an amazing panel, as you see on the screen right here. And today we're going to talk about alternative controls. But even before we get to that, I would like to give a quick intro to Yakub. He's going to be doing the research presentation for us. Is why are we even here, right? So as Construction Safety Research Alliance, our vision and mission is to eliminate serious injuries and fatalities in construction industry. So we have these community of practice calls to get our research out there. So this year we're basically reviewing our past research, bringing leaders from the industry to talk about how research implementation looked like for them, and what were the challenges, what are the opportunities, all to eliminate serious injuries and fatalities. We are very, very interested in having an impact, and then the only way we can do that is through practical applications. So these calls are very important to us. They're also publicly available to anybody who would like to listen. They are going to be recorded and shared after the call. So please feel free to forward the invite, forward the video. Let's get the good word out there. Now, I will not do introductions. I'm sure everybody can introduce them real quick in the interest of time. But today's format is going to be very similar to the earlier ones. We will start with a 10-minute research presentation, and then we will continue with a panel discussion with Ryan, Nadal, and Luke here. So before further ado, one thing I need to remind you is that you can use chat to communicate with us, and I'm opening the Q&A section of this Vimeo webinar also to share questions. As you think of them, please feel free to share. I will keep asking the panel questions until we run out of time. Now, with that said, are we all good to go? Yakub, are you ready?
I am.
All right, here you go. Please take over and quickly introduce yourself before you start. And we all have to congratulate you, by the way, because you just passed your comps exam. So
Thank you.
everybody, Yakub is so close to actually getting there. So congrats, Yakub. Take it away.
Thank you very much, everyone, and good morning. So before I begin, a quick introduction of myself. My name is Yakub Rahimi. I'm a third-year PhD student with the Construction Safety Research Alliance, housed at the University of Colorado Boulder. My last project involved working with the controls team to develop alternative controls, which we are going to talk about a bit more in this webinar. And currently, I'm also working on another research project called Decluttering Safety, which you guys will hear soon about it. But yeah, that's me. To start, the motivation behind defining alternative control stems from this broader questions of why we need to focus on serious injuries and fatalities. I'm not going to go very deep into this presentation as there's another community of practice calls which you guys can go and see more about this. But as shown in the graph, while as an industry we have made a great progress in reducing non-SIF injuries, the SIF rate has remained very stagnant over the past years, and the rate is constant. And this is due to several factors, but most importantly, it is because we, as an industry, looked into the causes of SIF and non-SIF from the same lens for years. However, recent work, specifically the work that the CSRA has done, that is that it's too different. The hazards that hurt people are not the same as the hazard that kill people. Or if I simplify this, a SIF should be managed differently. And again, this has been discussed more in a previous call, but this was mainly the motivation behind the definition of alternative controls and direct controls, which is that's why we have taken the alternative control research as well. So the energy-based approach has shown a promising result in addressing safe risks. There is again another community of practice which You can go ahead and watch a video if you're interested, which talks about the energy direct control and as well as the HECA or high energy control assessment. But in general, this also makes the foundation of our research of the alternative controls. In general, injury occurs when there is an uncontrolled release of energy. In other words, the more or the higher the energy, the more severe the energy is. So if you have more energy, it causes more or severe injury severity. So, and if this energy threshold exceed beyond 1500 joules, and if it's not controlled, it is very likely that the result we will get will be an ASIF event. That's what we call a sticky situations, which you guys can see on the screen, or stuff that can kill you. And we have simplified the calculations. And on the top right, you can see the common high energy icons that can be used to identify these high energy sources. But again, if you're more interested in more into this, please go ahead and watch the previous community of practice call that we have discussed more about the Heka and high energy. Now, with the safety and overall, one of the persistent challenge that we have is that we do not use share our common understanding of terminology. And one of those common terminology that we think we understand is controls. Unfortunately, there is no common and consistent definition of control in general, and as well as we don't have a definition for what an energy control is. So one of the first or initial step that we did in the alternative controls project was to first define what is an energy control itself. So with following our rigorous methodologies and research process, we came up with a definition of an energy control, which you all guys can see on the screen. Um, an energy control should be timely, tangible, and as well as targeted. When I say timely, that a specific control should be in place during the active work, and it should be tangible, which means that it should be physically present on the job site or the work site, and it should be targeted, which means that it should specifically be designed to address a high energy risks. So in general, what we did, and as the first or initial step in the alternative controls, we put a definition for what an energy control is. And with that, for instance, let's take an example of safety policy. We all know that safety policy is very important and very critical element of safety systems. However, it does not help us when we are mitigating or addressing safe risk or high energies. It means that we can have very outstanding and good policies in place, but it will not help us to mitigate the high risks or high energy hazards. There are other examples of such elements, for example, experience, work plans, trainings, having a very good quality job brief. But again, they are not counted as energy control. So it's very important to have this definition in mind before we go and talk more about the alternative controls and as well as direct control. So that was the first or one of those initial steps that we take in our research to have a consistent definition for energy control. Um, and direct control, which has been again discussed in our previous community of practice calls, are the most effective means or measures at mitigating high energy hazards and thus reducing the SIF risk. However, through an extensive on-site data collection that we have conducted in the series, we have found that approximately 65% of the time we have sticky situations, or there are situations that a direct control is not feasible, and it can be due to several reasons, which can be operational, technical limitations, or even contextual. So this left us with a gap of what we are going to do when a direct control is not feasible, or what can be considered enough control to mitigate high energy hazards when we do not have a direct control in place. And I'm not going to repeat again, but there is another community of practice call which you can go and listen more about the high energy direct control and sticky situations. However, this question or this gap led us to the development of what we call alternative controls. And what you can see on the screen is the roadmap of our project. And we all know that eliminating Ceph will require eliminating their condition, and those conditions are high energy hazards. So we we should have a direct control in place every time we identify high energy hazards in order to mitigate them adequately. But if we don't have a direct control in place, what we need to do, which was the roadmap of our projects, is to have robust or adequate controls in place in order to mitigate those risks. And for very future works, we also determined that we should design and collaborate in a way to have the work in a way that we should have a direct control in place, and we should be able to define more direct controls. This is because direct controls are, again, very effective ways of mitigating high energy hazards. So overall, this was what the general roadmap of the research was looking. So to get to that goal, or to get or to define alternative controls, we followed a very rigorous research process, which I'm not going to delve into details of it. But what we have done in general, we used a bunches of real sticky situations or hazards, and what we used them to analyze them and very properly, and then define what we call it alternative controls. So once we had a set of definitions and rules for alternative controls, what we did, we conducted a Delphi to make sure that the definition that we have produced about alternative control, we all agree upon, which is a very core part of having a common definition. And that was not the end. What we did, we also, once we have the final results after the Delphi, we used these definitions and frameworks of the alternative controls, and we tested it with a very distinct team of safety professionals to make sure that whatever we have defined is not only robust theoretically, but we can apply it in practice, and it can result in a promising way. By the way, this research took us 2 years, and we had 28 safety professional working with us and bringing a lot of and good quality data with a very enriched safety knowledge in that research group. So overall, this was the research process that we followed to define alternative controls. Um, and once we have gone through all those process, we came up with what we call alternative controls, which you can all see on the screen. And now you might think that we have spent 2 years with 28 members and then coming up with three icons. That's absolutely not true. There's a specific definition for each of these categories. So we have defined three different alternative controls, the categories of alternative controls, which are physical obstacles, dedicated monitoring, and visual reminders. And as I was saying, there is a specific definitions that we have used for each of these categories, and we have even picked every single word very carefully, and we have tested and defined it. Again, there are set of rules and frameworks that complement this. But for example, one of the key rules, which I have written on the top of this slide, is that when we are implementing alternative controls, we should have at least two alternative controls, which represents two different categories. And we have, again, added rules that should be in place in order for a control to be counted as an alternative control. Um, which you can go to our knowledge center at the CSRE website, and you can look more into this. Um, Another example that just came into my mind is like the specific rules that we have for sign, for example. For any signage that should be accounted as a part of alternative control, for example, it should communicate information about something that's unusual, hidden, or unexpected, and it should provide critical detail about that specific high energy hazards. So we cannot classify all signs as a part of alternative controls. We only classify signs that adhere to those rules that we have defined as an alternative control. So overall, these are the three different categories of alternative controls. There's a comparison between DC and AC that you can see on the screen. We have a specific definition for our direct control, which has been discussed in our previous UPs. You can see the specific definitions for each categories of alternative controls: physical obstacles, dedicated monitoring, and visual reminders. And each of them, they have their specific set of rules and frameworks that need to be in place. But a very key distinction between alternative control and direct control is that direct control is specifically designed to mitigate high energy hazard. However, alternative control is specifically designed to mitigate human error. So there is two sides of the equation. One way to mitigate high energy or self risk is to deal with the energy itself, which direct control presents a very robust way to do that. However, if there are situations that we might not have that solution or direct control in place, what we can do, we can implement alternative controls to deal with the human error side and prevent people from making mistakes. And thus, we are not involved in a situation that is sticky, or what we call the sticky. But overall, the key distinction here is that DC is specifically designed to mitigate high energy, and alternative control is designed to mitigate human error. And as I was explaining, there are a set of rules that complement alternative controls, but the reason that we iterate this one key rule for alternative control is that layering is key. When we are implementing alternative control, there should be at least two different alternative controls from two different categories. And the key reason is that if you have one control, we can mitigate the chance and error with that. And then since we have a different control from a different category, we can mitigate the chance and error with this another control. Since we are picking two different categories, it doesn't add up, it multiplies. So as a result, we mitigate the chance and error by 1 in a million, which is really promising. So alternative control might be a very good alternative if a DC is not feasible to tackle with the human error and mitigate human error, and in turn mitigate self risk or what we call high energy hazards. So overall, this was all about what we did in alternative controls. And again, we have detailed rules and definition for each of these, which you can all go and access it through our knowledge center. It's free and it's available. Yeah, please go ahead and watch it. And with that, I will hand this over back to Dr. Elif.
All right, we're back. Thank you so much for that intro. Um, so one thing I wanted to start the discussion with is alternative controls truly scratch an itch, right? When we built Heka, it was 65% success of direct controls, and everybody's like, what am I going to do with this remaining percentage, right? What is it gonna be? Because we're safety professionals, we can't just do nothing. So I'm very excited about this topic for today. And my first question to my panel is, this is a fairly new concept. How did your organization first approach the implementation of alternative controls? Did you have to get buy-in, and how did you secure it? And I think I will start with Ryan, maybe? Could you
Yeah,
start with
thank
the
you.
intro too?
Thank you, Elif. Good morning, everyone. I'm Ryan Edgerton, the Manager of Operational Safety for Pembina Pipelines in Calgary, Alberta. And I was the chair of the research team of the alternative control team. So, as you mentioned, this is a very new concept, and we haven't started down the path of implementation yet. But what I did do, I ran a workshop recently for an upcoming significant plant turnaround that's going to occur, and we have an area that is got a lot of simultaneous operations involved in a lot of high energy sources. And we did was we actually ran the workshop that Matt delivered at the summit, and with the contractors and our workforce, our operations and maintenance personnel, and work through direct controls, alternative controls, and identifying the high energy sources. And then leaving that at the end of the day was, if we don't have alternative controls for these high energy sources, we need to figure this out before we go into this turnaround, because obviously the stuff that kills you is the important stuff that we want to absolutely control.
Absolutely. Do you want to take the word? Luke, Nadal? Which one do you want to go first? I'll start with Luke.
All right, that sounds good. My name is Luke Boley. I'm the manager of field safety for Eversource. I cover the electric side of the house. The business does cover gas, electric, and water. I too was on this research study through the CSRA. I would say one of the ways that we were able to kind of get this implemented was to kind of walk it slowly, incrementally, similar to the energy wheel kind of rolls into the 1300 G icons and things like that. We started talking about kind of all alternative controls, right? Before the rules were published and before we had that type of rigor, we were just trying to say, if you don't have a direct control, what else do you have? What else are you looking at here? And trying to get folks thinking about what other layers do they have. And that was one way that we were able to kind of get the conversation started. And then again, we'll kind of recalibrate and adjust this year to implementing the actual rules and getting folks to really understand the difference between just any alternative control and the steps that will best put you in the best position you can be in.
Nidal, anything to add?
Yeah, I think so. So, good morning, everyone. Thanks for having me on the panel. My name is Nidal Naiman. I'm the Senior Director of HSE with Bird Construction based out of Edmonton, Alberta, is where I'm at. We are Canada-wide, but my office just happens to be in Edmonton. So you ask an interesting question, like, did we have to get buy-in and whatnot? I would say for our journey, very similar to what Ryan and Luke are sharing. But Dr. Leaf, I think what helped us with regards to the implementation or the rollout, if you want to call it that, was just the immense amount of defendable data and science that came from the CSRA. So when we rolled that out, and it was a journey. We rolled it out slowly. We didn't eat the elephant in one bite. It was one bite at a time over probably 3 years now, dating back to the energy wheel to where we are today. I would say when we rolled it out, it wasn't, hey, here's a theory, let's test it, or here's a thought or the new shiny object or something that sounds good. It was 3.2 trillion hours, exposure hours that was studied and stretched over 17 years. This is what the findings are. Here's what the industry's saying. Here's what's happening. This is medicine. This is science. This isn't thoughts or feelings or opinion. So I think that's what helped us really garner a strong buy-in from our field staff, and which is the most important, because they're the ones at the pointy end of the stick, as we say. So once we got that communicated well, we obviously purchased some of the training that was made available at the time. Went through the energy wheel, direct controls, HECA assessments, which were probably about a year into our HECA assessment journey, alternative controls, which we're into now, continuous training, continuous calibration. So that's what the journey's looked like thus far. We still have some more work to do, no doubt about it, but I would say the start has been a fairly strong start thanks to the work from the CSRA.
That's a really great intro to this panel, because we understand that alternative controls are just not going to happen alone, right? It is definitely a journey. Usually you start with the energy-based safety, right? That's how we started our community of practices this year. So the energy wheel, and then what is high energy, what is sticky, and then what is a direct control, and then we introduce HECA and then alternative controls. But I mean, there's a lot, and it's really hard to digest. So I really want to ask you about, what are the key components that made this implementation successful for you, and that you're feeling like you're progressing in your journey rather than standing? Because we both know that, like, flavor of the month is a problem for us. Usually these change management progresses take time. So could you talk a little bit about how does alternative controls fit in your system, and kind of what are the key takeaways from this?
I can start with that, Alif. One of the things that I found when I did that workshop is that every time I talk about alternative controls or direct controls or any of the work that we do in the CSRA to anyone in the workforce, is I go back to the slides that Yakub just presented to ground everybody in why this works, what it's based on. Like Nidal said, it's not based on feelings, thoughts, some safety person's theory that we created, or a good idea. It's based on science, and it's safety through science, and that really grounds people understand that this works. And that was one of the key things when we're doing any of the conversations, is that starting with that information. This is why, this is how, this is where we got to. That's one of the key things that I've found so far when we're implementing any of this stuff or introducing the concepts and ideas. We've been doing energy base since 2018, like many organizations, and even that took time to get it integrated into our own program, to tie it together into the processes that we have. We don't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater. There's a lot of history in our programs. There's a lot of theories that we've hung our hat on over the years. And so it does take a lot of time. But if you educate the people on the why and why it works, I've been finding that it's gaining lots of great reception.
Please jump in. We always have these conversations, people.
Yeah, absolutely. So to echo a little bit of what Ryan said, I think that the information that we share, at EverSource from the CSRA always has a little bit of, it's a little bit easier to sell because again, to echo their statements is you have the defendable research, you have, cases of how it happened, why it happened, and all that kind of builds in to tell the story. But I think the big thing, when we talk about buy-in is talking about high energy, right? That's what the folks, especially in the electric, oil and gas, that's what the folks really care about. And they may not ever say it, but that's what's on their mind. That's what they're thinking about. So when, folks go out to the field and their first discussion is, something that's pretty low hanging fruit, it kind of, people take a step back and they wonder what's this person doing, what do they know, that type of thing. When you come in and you start talking about high energy and you start talking about the sticky, what's going on in that job site, what you're doing about it, things like that, typically they're engaged, they want to tell you what they're doing about it because they've thought of those things too, and it really develops a good conversation, and that kind of trickles into the buy-in for the rest of the program.
Yeah, I think to no surprise, I'm on the same page. Like when Ryan and Luke were sharing some of their story, I made some notes here. It triggered a thought. I don't think we had a tremendous amount of struggle on buy-in per se, and I want to share the reason why. And I think this is important. Number one, Yakub with the chart that he opened the meeting with, right? We might be getting better at the non-life-threatening incidents. Maybe we are, or maybe we just have better, modified work programs, or we're good at the case management. I don't know, but the one that's unquestionably jumps out at you at those slides, and I hate that slide for this reason, is the fatality line hasn't improved. And this isn't data from 1950s, before the hard hat was invented or whatever. This is in recent history. So it's telling us, even in our most advanced world that we live in today, we're still not seeing a reduction in fatality. So if that doesn't grab your attention, what does? And then when we go and start talking energy, just to kind of Luke's point here, I think the way that we've been received at Bird, from the feedback I've been getting, and again, we still have a lot of improvement to do. Some of the superintendents and some of the craft will come up to me and say, "It's about time you guys have caught up to us. No longer are you trying to monitor us for compliance, and you're not focusing on the dust in the eye or the sliver. So we're not worried about case management and statistical stuff. Now we're worried about life preservation." So it's really easy to onboard someone on that, because no one wants to go to work and get seriously injured or God forbid killed. But so worry less about the type of glove they're wearing, and maybe more about a direct control for a suspended load or whatever. Alternative controls is the other note I made, and I'll move along here. But alternative controls, I believe they have been happening fairly well, because the administrative policies and practices prompt us to. So whether it's barriers, signage, alarms, spotters, we've had some remnants of that exist. But I think what made it easier for this, Dr. Leaf, is that we finally put a definition around it, and we're asking people to pick 2 out of 3. So now it's not like, hey, well, what's good enough? Well, Ryan might like this, Nadal might like that, Luke might like this. Now we're taking these thoughts and opinions out of the equation, putting a hard definition for it, and asking people to pick 2 for the reasons tied to that graph earlier. So in the absence of a direct control, because we know that we're going to have that, there's a secondary way we can go to try to, again, get to that life preservation piece versus compliance or data management or stat management. I hope that makes sense.
It does. And I actually want to piggyback on that one, Nidal, because the biggest feedback we're hearing from the industry is that why 2 out of 3? Like, what does 1 divided by 1,000 human error rate mean? Why can't just we have 1 and that's okay, right? Like, it's just, they're saying it is confusing. So I have a Q&A question here, so I'll give the word to Yakub for a moment. Where is this 1 divided by 1,000 error rate is coming from? And I guess would like you to follow up. talking a little bit more about how this 2 out of 3 can actually be applicable. Jakub, could you comment on that one real quick?
Of course, to the point that Nadal was explaining before I go to that question, one of the key reasons, there were like multiple reasons, but one of the key reasons that we did noise experiment was to make sure that we showed it to the industry people that there are controls that already we are applying it. Like as Nadal was saying, like we have spotters, we have signage, and we have that and all those stuff. But there's something that we again have problem in the safety space. If not all over the places, but in the key aspect is that illusion of agreement. We have things that we think we know all about it and we consistently use it, but we don't do it. So what we did in the alternative control, and we showed it that when we are applying controls to those high energy hazard, if they are not direct control, what we do is like we are so varied in our responses. We took one sticky situation and we asked audiences like, how would you rate this? And for the same sticky situation, we got varied controls, like different types of controls. And what we did with alternative control is that we put that boundary around the definitions. And what we did to we made sure that when we are applying alternative controls, we are all in the same page. We are consistent to what we are doing. And answering to that question, it all comes from our team. We discussed a lot about why we should combine two, why we should not have one. Obviously, there's a literature behind it that there are like a lot of literature actually that says that one control is not enough. But what we did, we moved and we kind of delve deeper into is like why one control is not enough, why we should have two. Um, and what we did, we came with a combination based on reasons that we collected from the data. And as Alan was explaining with the layering, is that um, if you have one control and we take the chance, for example, like the chance of error 1 in 1,000, that one specific control can mitigate that error, for example. And then since we are picking a different one, again, which is a different category, we're not selecting from the same category, it doesn't add up, it multiplies because there are two distinct things. Their functions are different. So when we multiply, we actually mitigate errors in different way. So one of the reasons that we had two different categories that we need to pick up was to mitigate errors from different sides, not only having one control that functions only for a specific reason, if I'm answering this right.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Anybody who wants to pick on that one?
Oh, we'll leave that one up to Yakub and yourself.
Well, you can't get away with too much. There's actually a question that is relevant here, that just got posted in the chat, and it's related to alternative controls again, and it's actually a very good question. The question is, to what extent might the appeal to rely on alternative controls inadvertently lead to reduced diligence in applying more effective direct controls? Very good question.
I
Yeah,
will
I
go
think
ahead.
Ryan, go ahead.
Yeah, please.
yeah. So I think during the 2 years of the project, we talked about that quite extensively, and that's going to be something that each organization has to drive forward. That if you have a direct control and it's practical and feasible, that's what you need to implement. You can't default to the easy button, because if we're defaulting to the easy button, we're not focusing on the energy sources that can kill you. And so it's going to be on the organizations to drive that. And the other conversations we had during the project was, there may be a direct control, but it is not financially feasible. It's not operationally feasible. And so when we eliminate that, say truly we've evaluated it and we can't do it, then we move to alternative controls.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
sorry, I could jump in on that as well. I think it's a brilliant question too. I mean, for me, when we study the behavior of our teams on site, we find that they're going to apply the control that requires the least amount of effort to apply. So, for example, if I'm trying to think of a real example here, if someone is working at heights, so the high energy source is gravity, right? And let's say they're on a flat roof doing some torch on roofing or whatever they're doing. They have, ideally, we would like to see an engineered handrail put in place that's going to be at the proper heights and all that stuff, versus someone who just throws on a full body harness, right? They're both targeted and all that kind of jazz. Now, if a full body harness is readily available and the person has training and a fall protection plan, they're going to throw on the harness versus going through all the effort and time of building a handrail around the perimeter. Why is that? Because the amount of effort exhausted to put in a control of a handrail is a monster compared to the minute or two it takes to fit your harness on properly. So, to what extent? I don't have a metric that says how many percent of our time people will go for an alternative control when a direct control is available. But again, just studying that, we're energy conservers by nature as human beings, so they're going to do whatever is the easiest to do at the time. I think what sets us up to have more direct controls than alternative controls, to Ryan's point, is a well chatted, well communicated pre-job brief, and maybe that's a different COP later with the CSRA, but we're finding in our very early stages of implementing the pre-job brief, when it's communicated instantly on what the expectation is from that supervisor on what control is needed, the crew will gravitate to that way versus trying to figure it out on their own real time in the field.
Yeah, I would agree. I would say at the very end, Nadal hit the nail on the head, saying that the expectation is that there's a direct control in place, for all high energy hazards. We're saying that you don't need to shut the job down and everybody goes home if there's not. There's other options, but we start here and then we work into the other options, as needed, depending on the situation and what's available.
And I mean, I really like how this conversation is coming in full circle, right? Now we're talking about pre-job briefs and how it can actually be used, and I really like that. But I need to move us along, so I'll keep asking my next questions. So my next question is, what kind of training was provided regarding alternative controls? But I think we covered that quite a bit. Anything else to add on that one?
Yeah, I have a couple of notes like Nadal wrote down. One of the key pieces when we talk about alternative controls is that differentiation between direct control, the purpose of a direct control, and the purpose of the alternative control, which is the mitigating human error. Very different things. But going back to the energy control definition, when we apply that, we know that things like safe work plans and procedures are not considered energy controls. But we also got one of the things we talked about in the training and things that we're doing is that you they're still important. They're important safety tools that cannot be discounted. You don't throw them out. In fact, pre-job briefing, quality pre-job brief is one of those items that isn't considered an energy control, but is extremely important. And that's how the pieces tie together so that we have all the really good stuff we need. But when it comes to energy controls, there's only two types, direct and the alternative control.
Yep. One of the other ways that we've tried to kind of bake this into operations a little bit is to do observations with, safety and, an operations supervisor. So we partner up in the field, and then we start talking about the high energies at the job site, right? What are the high energies? What are the direct controls? And then again, last year we were focused on kind of all the alternative controls that may be applied. Whereas this year we'll start to bake in those rules and say, okay, do we have enough to be satisfied?
Anything else to add to this, Nidal, before I go to the hard question, the challenges and the barriers?
No, bring on the hard questions.
Bring on the hard question. So I always want to finish on a high note, and we have about 20 minutes. So this 10 minutes is going to be a venting session, hopefully, before we go to the high note. So the question is, did you face any challenges or barriers during the alternative control implementation in your conversations with your workforce, with your management? Send them away. What do you think?
Well, as I mentioned, we're still fairly early on here, but like any change, it's change and it's not always accepted well. And one of the biggest things is that we have to be really clear and concise on what this is, why it works, and it takes time. And we have a lot of concepts and a lot of theories and a lot of pieces of our programs that we've used over many years that this may not fit into. But one of the bigger challenges is making it fit into the things that we do without abandoning everything that we do right now. That's even with the energy-based energy wheel, great. It was fantastic, well received. But then, how do we keep that sustained and moving forward? And that'll be the challenge here as well. Again, and also the other challenge being is how do we just not hit the easy button?
I think another thing that would be definitely helpful is to make sure that you're sharing the vision of the whole process. We've talked a few different times today about how things are kind of incremental, and when we step through the journey of energy-based safety. And I think it's important that senior leadership understands the end vision and what you're trying to get to. I think that will help, especially where like for us, where we were pulling the supervisors aside, and doing those co-observations together. We wanted to make sure that their leadership understood the value of what we were trying to teach them. And then again, it comes around full circle because the operations supervisor and safety are both talking about high energy on the job. The crews are starting to engage with it. And again, people see it in the end, but you got to kind of explain the why and the vision in the beginning.
Yeah, I mean, to no surprise, again, totally agree. I mean, the challenges I would say we faced, Dr. Leaf, is when we first started talking about alternative controls and we were trying to tie it into direct controls, and it all stemmed from HECA, which was born in the energy wheel, etc. When I look at that whole journey, so maybe this is a bigger answer than just alternative controls, but when I looked at the whole journey, the initial rebuttal was, oh my God, another safety thing for me to do on top of this stack of safety stuff that you're already making me do. And that's our fault as safety professionals, right? We've conditioned the teams to think that better safety means layers and layers of administrative control, which is totally wrong. So I think once again, Yakub's slide went up with the graph on the fatality rate, paired up with the defendable data, people started to understand, okay, you're actually looking at stuff that can kill us versus, hey, why aren't you wearing the right type of safety glasses based on the time of day? The buy-in really started to happen. And then when we implemented the rules around HECA, like the message to our team was, if you're doing a HECA assessment and it's taking you more than 15 or 20 minutes, you're doing it wrong. You're overthinking it. Go and look at high energy hazards. Is there a direct control? Yes or no? Could there be one? Yes or no? If there's exposure, pause until some sort of control in place. The answer was, well, there isn't a direct control every time. Yes, we know that. So here's some alternative controls that you guys are already doing well. Just pick two. So I think the challenge we had was, again, the initial rebuttal, thinking that there was just more stuff that the safety department's pounding on operations, which was not the case. And the other was just getting educated, and that's a journey. That's not an end date on what alternative controls look like and the constant calibration around it. So I would say those were the two stumble points that we had in the year or so that we've been doing this.
And there is a question from the audience. How much focus and effort did you have with the frontline management and the middle management? Because apparently the past experience is that when they understand, this evolves much quicker and there's a lot more success with the workers. That true?
Totally true. I would say if I were to throw a number at it, it's 80-20. 80% frontline and 20% middle management. Middle management almost had oversight on how we're doing, where the executioners of the HEC assessments and corresponding ACDC was totally the front line. So I agree. Yeah, when the field is bought in, the rest is easy.
Yeah,
Any
I would say
other?
that we had very similar results and a very similar approach. We focused almost solely on frontline supervisors, field level safety advisors, and things like that, pushing that information out to the craft, and then updating senior management on kind of what we're doing and how it's going.
It seems like though there may be some issues related to how that information is shared. So one of the audience questions is that how does this work if the workforce is very, very diverse, like language barriers, who predominantly speak another language, and if you had that issue, how did you combat that?
hopefully I'm not jumping in too quick here, but Dr. Leaf, I'd say the same way we combat any issue. So these workers, regardless on what language they speak, are receiving some form of instruction, whether it's safety related, production related, productivity related. So I think for us, where we found pockets of success is that conduit or that main communicator to the diverse workforce that we have is the one that really has to have a strong understanding and onboarding of it. And maybe that invites that we have to spend more time with that person to calibrate them. But it'd be the same way we handle any other communication barriers with the workforce for sure.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I agree with Nadal there as well. Like we don't have it predominantly. I don't see it as much, but when we do, it's you need to spend that time and a effort with the individuals because they're if 50% or 70% or 80% are doing it, but the other 20 other percentage isn't and doesn't understand it, then we're not getting to where we need to be.
Um, for sure. So moving away from that a little bit, we had a couple of questions related to how this fits in the grand scheme of things. So one question said, is HECA going to change, right? Is now alternative controls going to build in HECA? And another one said, will they be given equal consideration to direct controls? And will there be a balancing act? So I will take that question. So for HECA is basically the proportion of direct controls versus the high energy hazards that don't have a direct control, right? So HECA is primarily built for the direct control monitoring. So there will be no changes to HECA whatsoever because it simply measures another thing. But for alternative controls, of course, there is ideas about monitoring alternative controls also and building metrics that also captures alternative controls. Now, it's not going to be HECA, it's going to be something else. But of course, there will be merit in measuring it just to make sure that we can identify areas where we have absolutely no control, right? That's really important and interesting to the safety professionals because I can't have a direct control, I don't have an alternative control. Then what can I do? Which situations, which tasks are like this? And then how do I get there? So that was a very good question. Anything else to comment on how we do this balancing act between direct controls and alternative controls?
Yeah, I would say that one of the lines that I feel like came up during the meetings that really resonated with me was, what could you accept? What would help you sleep at night, right? So if there's no direct control in the job, that's where our buckets really kind of began. Was okay, no direct control. How can we get the work done? What will make it so I can hang the phone up and say, okay, we're in good shape. It's a perfect no, but it's in really good shape, and we're happy. So I think that was kind of how we began dividing the buckets out at the very beginning of the project.
Yeah, and that was an extremely important thing to do because we kind of wound up in a spot where I think we were conflating the two, and then it's as Matt said, it's like you're out on the job site, you don't have a direct control, and this tool and these tools are to say you call your supervisor, say I don't have a direct control, but I've got these two things or these three things as alternatives, and that's they can make that decision, say we're good to proceed with that work under those circumstances, and that's kind of where we drew that line and tried to separate them, and that was something that we did right from the start as well. So
While you're implementing this, did you did you create an entirely different inspection program, or did you convert some of your existing observations to HECA observations that would include alternative controls as well? How did you manage the workload? Because like you can't add, right? Like you have to take some things away. How did that look like for you?
Yeah, we we had our HECA assessment is currently separate from our formal weekly inspection, right? So our formal weekly inspection, again, I look at it where it's kind of an umbrella where you see everything from cradle to grave. The fire extinguisher that's not inspected, the hose or the cord that's not rolled up, the WCB poster on the wall that may be expired. None of that stuff is considered high energy. So right now there are two different inspections: the formal inspection that we do, which is, I would say, a compliance inspection, and then the HECA inspection, which is targeted specifically at high energy tasks only. And there's sometimes, like if we're constructing a building and we're at the TCCC stage where we're ready to turn it over, there might not be high energy tasks happening, so it doesn't invite an opportunity to do a HECA assessment. So maybe a little bit of a long answer, but they are two different assessments, and obviously because of the data that we're learning, our focus right now is on getting the HECA assessment prioritized over the formal compliance assessment.
Luke, Ryan?
Yeah, very very similar. We did create our own kind of our own special sheet to go off of, and the idea is the more we can get it populated between the understanding of, is there direct control, is there an alternative control, and then, like I said, this year we're going to work on the rules for the alternative control. So, we're kind of layering it like that to build to doing true HECAs. But again, wanted everyone to kind of understand the baseline and get a good, I guess, just a good understanding across the board. That way, the next step again is a little bit more logical and not like we said at the beginning. It's not a flavor of the day change. It's an incremental step to where we want to be.
Yeah, and we haven't changed we have focus inspections based on our life saving rules, which are quite often high energy sources. We don't get directly into direct controls and alternative controls yet. We're still working on how do we tie all this together so that it makes sense to everybody. And Nadal's point earlier, just not another thing that I'm asking you to do from a safety perspective. We want to make sure that it's something that people understand. They know that it's not adding work and that it makes sense to them. And then we can actually do something with that information as well. So it's going to take a bit of time to tie it all together. And that's going to be our focus going forward.
So I would love to spend all my day with you talking about all of these things, but we have about 7 minutes. So I would like you to give an opportunity to you to just simply kind of your final words, of course, but could you also provide advice to people who are just heard about what an alternative control is and they want to engage, but it's too big to engage? Where do we start? How do we navigate? Which strengths could we leverage? So I'll go in order, but from the other way around this time around. So Nidal, could I call you out on this one first?
Yeah, absolutely. You can. Look, if there's any advice I can give to anyone, I would say just get started. Expect it to be messy. Build the plane as you fly, and you're not trying to create something that's never been heard of before ever. Like again, I know it sounds like I'm giving the CSRA a plug here, but the truth is they're very data rich with anything that will help you dispute any rebuttal that you're going to have. So just start doing your HEC assessments, start doing your hunts for direct controls, educate your people on alternative controls. You're not authoring anything. All you're doing is taking the work that's already been done, vetted by brilliant minds, and just putting it into play in your organization. So that's what it is. I'll just get started.
Luke, would you like to go next?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think that, not to repeat anything that Nadal just said, but one of the things that I've found that really can be a little bit tedious, but I think is important, is to have a solid message and continue it and continue it and continue it. I feel like I say high energy hazard, high energy assessment at almost any time that I'm speaking, in my organization. So having that rigor around it, get your teams doing the same thing, where finally people are going to realize that, hey, every time anyone from safety is around, they're talking about the high energy hazards, high energy assessments, whatever the case may be. This is what they keep talking about. Let's dig into it. And that's where you can get the buy-in from the folks. Any naysayers or people on the outskirts may you can kind of wear them down. But you're also bringing it front of mind. If you're talking about it in multiple different meetings with multiple different levels of the organization, you're going to get other people asking questions. You're going to get the operations president, a director that says, "Hey, what's this? What's that?" And then that buys in more. And now that meeting has, had a big high energy focus, where it may not have been before. So it is a journey. It doesn't happen overnight, but you can continue to share the message and continue to repeat the message, and you can have some good luck with that with a little persistence.
Ryan, I mean, you're the third to go, so a lot of it is already said. But go ahead.
Thanks, Nadal and Luke. That what they said. But just to back that up again is take your time though. Don't complicate it. Use the research. Use the tools that are out there, and people will get sick of me saying it's safety through science, and it's backed by research and evidence, and it's not somebody's theory. And that's what's been landing in any of the topics we talk about is it's not a safety person's new theory. We have evidence that this works and does work.
Okay, well, this is going to be really hard to follow, Yakub, but I set you up for success here. So, anything else to add as we close?
There's one thing that I would like to mention. I know we talked a lot about the science side of it, how we did it, but wasn't 10 minutes so short. But all of our research work that we do in the CSRA is going to be submitted to a peer-reviewed journal. So for the alternative controls, we have sent our paper to one of the very good journal, and hopefully we hear soon from them. So if you want to look more into how we did it, to go to details of how we vetted it, and how we build the credibility and validity of our research. Hopefully we will have it soon and we will share it to our CSRA website and LinkedIn.
Thank you so much. Well, yes. So what Yakub is trying to tell you is that if you want to read a 20-page article, he's going to send that to you very soon. But I would like to conclude our community of practice today. This was an amazing panel. I learned a lot for starters. But thank you so very much for your thoughts, and to the audience for your questions. Today was a Thursday, so it's a little atypical for us. But next month we're going to back into our normal schedule. We're going to have it on May 20th on a Tuesday. And our dearest Dr. Fred Sherratt will talk about incident investigations and learning. So we're actually changing gears for our next community of practice. But this alternative controls presentation concludes our series of energy-based safety, right? In January, Dr. Hallowell talked about energy-based safety. In February, we talked about the tyranny of TRIR, where we all started. In March, we talked about high energy controls assessments in practice. And now this is the final piece, the alternative controls, where if a direct control is not present, what do we do? How do we respond to that? And how does all of this work in implementation? And you're basically, not to, put you on the spot, but you're looking at the pioneers who are trying this for the first time, getting it going, and they will learn and hopefully they'll share their learnings so that everybody else needs to make the same mistakes. But with that, I would like to thank all of you again. We answered all of the questions we can. There were a lot though, so if there are any other questions, please feel free to send emails to us. And this session is recorded, so you can always share it and go back to it if you needed to listen to it again. But with that, hope you have a great day and have a great weekend. I think that's coming up too. Goodbye, everyone. Bye.
Thanks, everybody. Thank you.